This is a video I've wanted to do for a really long time because I've always had a passion for physical media, but now more than ever, it's really starting to grow and I'm starting to expand on my collection of DVDs. So I might as well do a video for all the films I have. For one, this is my favorite movie of all time, The Dark Knight. It's brilliance all around. The acting is incredible. Christian Bale delivers a really compelling performance as Batman. Heath Ledger as a Joker, that's one of my favorite acting performances of all time. And in general, it's such a well rounded film. It's such a great villain, and it's just a really compelling, fast paced story, too, especially for the way they approached it, making it more of a crime drama than a real superhero movie, but they nailed it. I love The Conjuring. This is one of my favorite horror films of all time because it is pretty jump scare heavy, yes, but the jump scares are actually delivering something. They actually have a payoff to it, and it's actually building to the suspense because there's something there you're supposed to be scared of. It's not. There's no false jump scares. Batman Begins. This is a great way to start the Dark Knight trilogy, and once again, Christian Bale delivers an excellent performance in this film. And honestly, I just love the villains they introduced. For one, they introduced Ra's al Ghul. They introduced Scarecrow. He was brilliant in the film. Cillian Murphy, great actor. I love Die Hard. This brilliant film. It's one of my favorite action movies of all time. I love Bruce Willis as John McClane, and I love his duality with Al Powell. They were both such a great team. And the ending was also really compelling emotionally. It was one of the few endings that actually had some emotional weight to it for me. It actually made me tear up. Ghostbusters, I love comedies with Bill Murray in it, and this is no exception. This is actually a really solid comedy. There are some moments that are just really bizarre and out of place with it, but for the most part, it's really solid. Us, this is in my top 5 favorite horror movies of all time. I just love how ambiguous it is, for one, and just in general, how metaphorical it is with many ideas. There's a lot of interpretations of it. Like, it could be a symbol for duality, it could be a symbol of how people who are being oppressed are coming up and starting to take over, or starting to get their vengeance. There's a lot to take in from it, and it's very rewatchable. Zombieland, it's a really solid zombie comedy. I love Jesse Eisenberg and Woody Harrelson in this film. They're both brilliant. I would have liked to see more of Jesse Eisenberg running away from zombies, things like that, and less romantic comedy style to it. But really, other than that, it's really solid. Inception, man, this is a very compelling story and one of Christopher Nolan's best films. Cause I love Leonardo DiCaprio as the protagonist here, and in general, they really bring so much backstory to his character where you can really understand him and care for him, and actually understand his motive for being here, and it all ties in together really well. American Psycho, easily the best dark comedy of all time. There's so much going on with each scene they're trying to convey. It has some excellent cinematography with the camera angles they use, and I love Christian Bale's performance here. A lot of people misinterpret it, and they don't see it as a dark comedy, so they think his acting is really bad, but that's not the case. Godzilla, this is a brilliant work of CGI here. I would have liked to have seen more Godzilla and less focus on the human characters, although it was one of the few Godzilla films to actually develop the human characters well, which is something I can appreciate, but at the same time, there wasn't much of Godzilla in it compared to, say, Godzilla King of the Monsters, or more recently, Godzilla vs. Kong, which I would argue were better films. Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger. This is one of my favorite action movies of all time. This is brilliant. I love the suspense aspect to it, but just in general, Arnold Schwarzenegger's one-liners, they are very memorable. Easily, the most quotable one is "Get in the chopper." But yeah, I also Love Halloween 2. It's a brilliant horror sequel. I just love the Halloween franchise as a whole. Halloween 2018 was solid. Halloween Resurrection was massive disappointment, but this one, easily the best sequel in the franchise. Insidious. Easily the best PG-13 horror film that I've ever seen. It was very effective with its nightmarish imagery and its suspense too. The way they approach the idea of someone possessing you as you're in astro travel, brilliant. And they really did give quite a bit of emotional weight to the characters too, which I loved. Interstellar. Not Christopher Nolan's best film. I would say this is probably one of his worst films, but it's definitely up there. It's really solid. I loved the use of CG work with the wave scene combined with a lot of the space scenes, which use more practical effects, including the set for the spaceship. It was brilliant. The visuals were incredible. Dunkirk. This is easily my favorite war film of all time. Christopher Nolan had some excellent direction here, but also some great cinematography from Hoyt van Hoytema. Overall, a great use of practical effects too, and some excellent production value. Really well-rounded film. It, 2017. Probably my favorite Stephen King adaptation besides The Shining. Batman and Batman Returns. I have not seen Batman Returns, but I have seen Batman 89, and I really loved it overall. It was great acting performance from Jack Nicholson as a Joker. Michael Keaton also delivers a great performance as Batman too. Silence of the Lambs. I love Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter. He is so good in this film, and he has such a psychological power to his character that he delivers really well with his acting. I also love Jodie Foster as Mrs. Sterling, the detective. Man, she's brilliant. Nightmare on Elm Street, the first four. I've only seen the first three Nightmare on Elm Streets, and out of those three, my favorite sequel is definitely Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, Dream Warriors. It's so creative, and it brings in so much with its concept and new characters that are well developed overall that you can actually care for compared to Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, which most of the characters in that film are very disposable. Annabelle Creation. Not a terrible film, but it feels a lot more dependent on its scares and less dependent on its characters because these characters make terrible decisions, especially the main protagonist. A lot of times the stupid decisions she makes kind of overrides how much humanity she has and how relatable she is as a character. Conjuring 2. Really good sequel. I would even say it's better than the first Conjuring because they give a lot more of a character arc to Ed and Lorraine Warren, making it a much more compelling story. Halloween Resurrection. I think you guys know this is a massive guilty pleasure for me. It's a terrible film by definition, but things like Buster Rhymes karate chopping Michael Myers down a window, it's so unintentionally hilarious that sometimes I just have to watch it. Halloween 2018. Now, Jamie Lee Curtis is brilliant in this film, and I love the character arc they bring with her, but a lot of this film is really not well paced at all. It's kind of messy, in a sense, with a lot of the subplots they bring in, and it doesn't feel very focused with its story. Coming to America. Really solid comedy. It's a very cliched love story. It's like everything you would expect to happen does happen, but like Eddie Murphy brings so much personality and so much light to it to where it's like I can appreciate it really well. 28 Days Later. This is probably the scariest zombie movie I've ever seen besides Dawn of the Dead 2004 because, oh man, Cillian Murphy is great in this film, but also just the cinematography, the POV shots of zombies about to sprint and run into people before it actually happens, almost like the way Jaws and Halloween do it, but it's somewhat effective in the way it's done as a zombie film. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This is really effective as just an exercise in tension and just a purely unsettling horror film with mostly just disturbing visuals that give it a sense of realism. It's so brilliant. The Exorcist, it's not terrible. It's definitely a really solid horror film, but I think it is a bit overrated with people saying it's the scariest horror film of all time. Maybe an unpopular opinion, but bear with me on that one. Scream, the first three Screams. I liked Scream 1 and Scream 2. Scream 2 was a really solid sequel. The first Scream was a great horror comedy, and I loved the murder mystery aspect to it too. I think they all blended pretty well, and I was surprised by Scream 2. The Babadook. This is pure psychological horror, and in that sense, it's brilliant. I could not see it being done any better than this, or other than Hereditary, which is honestly the scariest horror film I've ever seen. Knives Out. Really great murder mystery, the way it's adapted into film. I love any murder mystery that can be well adapted into film, but this one in particular is definitely my favorite. I do love murder mystery TV shows like Psych and Castle, but you don't often get many murder mysteries in the form of a film, but this film delivers it brilliantly. Night of the Living Dead, a very effective zombie film. Not my favorite of all time, but it's definitely a classic, like an essential to watch. King Kong 2005 with Jack Black. The first act of the film is very overly long to a point where it kind of takes you out of it, but when you actually get to the second act, it is very exciting and very well paced too. Minus some pretty bad CGI. Hereditary. This is, as I said, the scariest horror film I've ever seen. I've not seen anything like it. It's so brilliant. It's just Toni Collette's acting performance as Annie. You constantly feel like she's on edge. She's already reached her breaking point by the first act alone, so she's just on edge the rest of the film, and you're just waiting to see her break or do something horrible. It's Halloween. This is one of my favorite horror films of all time. It's in my top 5, definitely. And I love how it's just a pure, raw suspense story, and it doesn't try to be anything other than that. It doesn't waste your time at any point. It's very well paced as a suspense horror film. The Dark Knight Rises, a really great conclusion to the trilogy, and it's definitely up there with my favorite movies of all time. Joker. This film was so effective with Joaquin Phoenix's acting performance. The way he was able to portray how he was just so miserable and sad while he was laughing uncontrollably, that was masterful. I could not have seen that being done better by any other actor. He had such a special performance with this film, and in general, his drift towards insanity. It was so compelling to watch because you really cared for his character, and you didn't want him to drift into insanity and make the wrong decisions. And as he's doing it, you're really worried for him. That's why I love it. Get Out. This is definitely a really excellent directorial debut from Jordan Peele. A great horror film overall. It's very suspenseful towards the final act when they actually reveal something. I won't go into spoilers, of course, but man. Dawn of the Dead. Great zombie movie. It's definitely one of my favorites, and one of Zack Snyder's best films, in my opinion at least. Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz. I haven't seen Hot Fuzz, but I've seen Shaun of the Dead. I think it's a great comedy with Simon Pegg and Nick Frost. They're a great comedic duo, and they have great acting chemistry together. The Fanatic. This is, by definition, a terrible movie in every way. John Travolta, this is probably his worst, most over-the-top performance, but it is so hilarious. Very unintentionally so. The Invisible Man. This is definitely my favorite horror film from 2020. It's a great acting performance from Elizabeth Moss, and it's a very compelling story, almost like Our House Horror, but disguised as like a mainstream jump scare film. I wouldn't go as that far, but it's definitely close. The Shining. This is my second favorite horror film of all time. Jack Nicholson is so brilliant in the way he portrays just drifting off into pure insanity as he's being possessed by this hotel or whatever it is that's possessing him or causing him to become purely insane and want to murder his family. But overall, it's brilliant. Friday the 13th, the whole 8 movie collection. Now, I don't think any of the Friday the 13th movies are really that good, but they're massive guilty pleasures for me. I'm a massive fanboy of this franchise as a whole, and easily my favorite film from a guilty pleasure standpoint is Part 8 because, man, some of the things they bring in are so unintentionally hilarious. And the first Friday the 13th is pretty watchable too. But man, it's not structured well as a series. But yeah, that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video, and be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you want to see more, and I will see you in the next video.